Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Subchakshai-Bankard, and I'm here with a couple of face huggers. First, I can't lie about his chances, but he has my sympathies. It's P.T. McNiff. How's it going, P.T.?
Why did the blind miner fall into the well? He didn't see that well. I'm doing good, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great. There were so many of those to choose from. Greg,
but that one was my favorite. That was my favorite of the ones,
yeah. And if he doesn't stay quiet, we all die. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
I'm good, Jen. How are you?
So,
a famously visual medium, podcasting.
Listeners.
Jen, of course, in space, no one can hear me scream. No one can hear me scream.
I asked Greg a joke that really translates to an audio podcast. For listeners who can't see what we just saw, Greg was screaming silently into his microphone. Very clever. So if you're still with us, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Alien Romulus, which is out in theaters now. The story follows a desperate crew of miners who try to hijack an abandoned ship and find much more than they bargained for. Unsurprising, it's an alien movie. Rising star Kaylee Spaney, whom you might have seen in Priscilla or Greg's film of the year, Civil War, leads the film in the Ripley-esque role. If you're listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designated for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. And I would also say, because this is a part of a larger franchise, we'll try not to drop any heavy spoilers for other Alien movies until we get to spoiler mode as well. I think we should be able to do that. PT, if listeners think our prime directive is to do what's good for them after listening to this episode, what can they do?
If your contract has been extended to work even further for the company, but you don't want to miss any new episodes while you're working, please follow The Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, any place you listen. You can also find us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, and also on Letterboxd. You can follow the account at LTRpod, or look for the hashtag LTRpod to see what each of us individually are watching. Jen?
Amazing. Thanks, PT. So we are going to skip movie news this week because we are planning to have an episode entirely devoted to kind of news coming out of the fall film festivals, which are some of them just wrapped up, like Telluride just finished today, I think. And then, Venice and TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, and New York International Film Festival. Like, there's a slew of stuff and buzz and that we're going to kind of unpack probably in our next episode. And let me tell you, I am dying to talk to other people about this. Like, I have been isolated listening to podcasts about this, and I have not talked to any real humans in person. So I'm really looking forward to that. But today is all about Alien. So I want to start with our relationship to the franchise, even before we get to the short take on Romulus, sort of like, what is the context with which you are coming to this film?
I'll start as the person who is trying the most to get us to do this episode. Like all good exennial generation kids, I came to Alien initially through the scene from about 15 minutes from the end of Spaceballs, which is the first time I was aware that there was a chest burster, that John Hurt was a human being that existed in the world. But from there, I did watch the first two movies at some point in probably high school. I can't say there are two of those movies where I can't recall, like, this is where I was when I saw it, which means I feel like it was before I went to college. And so it was sometime in that window when I was soaking up all the movies I'd heard about for so long. But then I did skip the other two sequels until we started getting closer to Prometheus, because I'd always heard they weren't very good. Same with the Alien versus Predator movies. I didn't watch those until like a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, I dutifully went and saw Prometheus. We'll get into discussing that, but I didn't care for that one that much. So I've always had a lot of love for those first two, but kind of felt like this was like the Terminator movies, another James Cameron related franchise where it had this great first movie, a really smartly done sequel that like added while also kind of shifting some things, and then a bunch of attempts to recapture that magic that never worked. And now we're here at a new movie. Greg, well, how about you? What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll pick up and say that my revelation while experiencing some aliens this summer was that description that PT just gave is how I feel about the franchise and Terminator. I do kind of link those mentally. And then I think I was literally like chopping carrots and I like paused and turned to my wife and explained that. And I was like, is that how normal people feel about Star Wars? And realized that they do. And that like broke my heart, that like my personal obsession. So while this has never been my franchise, I am trying really hard to respect it because I do imagine there are some people who really have gotten into this mythology. Somewhere in social media land, when Romulus came out, somebody posted like the stack of their alien novels, and I was just shocked how many there are, and that, again, this is like a treasured franchise for a lot of people. So I think I've confessed on this. I've at least had to face the withering gaze of PT in this regard before, that I am not good with 80s movies. My friend group here in Boston often makes fun of me for this. It came up because I had never seen Beverly Hills Cop. And so I watched that before watching the new one this summer. And it's just a blank spot for me. I think when I was growing up in the 80s, my family watched a lot of the old Disney movies. I was the person who was super excited Haley Mills was in the new M. Night Shyamalan movie because I was like, yes, Haley Mills, that's my jam. And so like that's more my speed, and I just missed all of these. So my friends shamed me, and I did end up watching Alien and Aliens, I think during the pandemic. So only like maybe 5 years ago tops. It might have been just before. And I enjoyed them, and I think I was okay on Alien, and then my friends were like, well, Aliens is the masterpiece, and I did think it was better, and I thought it was very good. I like the kind of tone of the first one a lot, and I think this new one is really trying to recapture that tone. After I saw Romulus, I then continued on my journey. I'd had it tipped to me that this one took place between those first two. And so in a big mushy blur this August, I got through Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, Prometheus, Alien Covenant, and I did not go farther than that. So I did not go into the Alien versus Predator side of the universe. But it was a really interesting journey, and I think I want to unpack a little bit more about Prometheus and Covenant to understand kind of where they came from and how they fit into this universe. But it has not felt like a waste of time to me, that even if some of these are a little more schlockier than the rest. Jen, famous horror lover Jen Subchakchai Bankard, how did you feel about the Alien franchise prior to this movie?
So this was a huge blind spot for me, and here's why. There used to be in Disney World a ride called Great Movie Ride, yes. And basically the idea was like it was a dark ride where you're like sitting in a thing that's moving along on a track, and it goes through all the greatest hits of up until that point Hollywood, right? So it starts with like The Wizard of Oz, right? It goes from black and white to color, and then it's like singing Gene Kelly doing singing in the rain. There is one part where a xenomorph pops out of the ceiling and like dangles above you, like as if you're going to get eaten by it. So childhood Jen was like, no, I'm out. I'm not into these movies. It was terrifying. And that was the only reason I always hesitated. That was like, and I went on that ride many, many times. And that was always the part where I like scrunched down and closed my eyes and covered my ears and was like, I'm not here. I'm not here. I'm not here. Was the alien part. Everything else I was fine with. And so as everyone likes to make fun of, I'm notoriously wary of anything that's horror leaning at all. I love sci-fi, so I've always been kind of torn of like, oh, like maybe I should watch these, and then I'm like, no, I'm too scared. And so I think for the longest time I had only ever seen Prometheus. Like that was the only alien movie I had ever seen, which I think is like not as, at least most of it is not as horror leaning. There's some horror parts I think in it, but like mostly it's kind of a more cerebral sci-fi experience. And so I was like, oh, like this is actually not bad. Why is everyone hating on this movie? And I think now, because now I have seen Alien and Aliens, I'm like, oh, my impression of Prometheus was entirely colored by the absence of having watched Alien and Aliens. Like I understand why people bump up against that movie now, because it's just so widely different, and trying to do something different. So I could see that if Alien and Aliens was sort of your foothold in the franchise, why Prometheus is like very confusing. But again, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But that's kind of so I watched Alien and Aliens just before watching Romulus, and in fact, I had a really weird experience where like I didn't get to finish Alien, and then had to drive to the theater to go see Romulus, and then came back and watched the last 25 minutes of Alien. Oh boy, that was weird. That was I feel like I had a very unique experience that I will not be able to replicate in terms of like experiencing both of those movies. So yeah, but you know what? Like having watched these movies, I'm starting to get over my fear, and I'm ready to follow Ripley into a volcano. Like let's like, so I'm like much more on board now, I think.
So maybe you should watch Alien 3. Wait, we'll wait till we get to spoiler mode.
But yeah, I was like, maybe I can watch all of them, and then I looked at the list and I'm like, no, there's no way. So I stopped. But yeah, that's kind of my history with this franchise.
Well,
with
let's just give
in.
a shout out to friends of the podcast, The Nostalgia Test, by saying I think I'm thumbs up that these are better than just pure nostalgia. I think these are worth seeing if you are like us and haven't experienced them. They're fun, and it's not that you had to be a child in the 80s to really appreciate them. I think they stand on their own.
I agree, and I think that the main ones, again, we could spend as little or as much time as we want. I'm the only one who's seen them. The Alien versus Predator movies are trash. Like they were never good. Like the problems these movies have, when there are problems, were there at the beginning. It's not because, oh, time passed and things changed, whether it's filmmaking or it's audience expectations or whatever. They are what they are, and I think that they're one thing that is commendable about the franchise is it's always sort of pushing into weird different directions and trying to have a big arm embrace of whatever mythology exists and whatever sort of stuff is going on. So it's almost always trying to do something different and new, and I respect that, even if sometimes it doesn't work. And again, really only those first two are the ones that are like, if you're a movie lover, you should see those no matter what. If you're into those first two and you kind of want more, if you want to follow Ripley into lava, then you can keep going into the future ones and see what's happening. Or yeah, so I agree. I'm but I'm also biased because I came in being like, well, Aliens are both. One of them is one of the best horror movies of all time, and one of them is one of the best action movies of all time. So I feel confident my opinion is validated by my continued experience, as I always do.
So let's get into our short takes, our general impressions of Alien Romulus. We have kind of a diverse set, the three of us, in terms of our orientation to the other movies, but how did this one land?
I suspect I might be most positive on this. I thought this was fantastic. I had a really, really good time at this movie. I thought that it was, on its surface, absolutely trying to recapture that old magic and get back to the old formula. And as such, I thought it was successful, right? I thought the kind of basic premise was good. I continue to think Kaylee Spaney is just one of the best, brightest, fresh stars out there. Priscilla was not perfect, but she was very good at a really difficult part, and she, fill in Civil War and Alien Romulus into all of those. I mean, Ripley is one of, if not the most iconic female action heroes of all time, belongs on the list, gender neutral as well. So it's pretty incredible to hand off this part and say, you're going to be doing Ripley and there's no way you're not going to be compared. She suffers a little in the comparison, but I thought was very good. I also, somebody in a minute correct me, but the actor who played Andy, whose name I'm forgetting, but he
David
busted onto the
Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. He busted onto the scene in Rye Lane, which was, I would call it Before Midnight set in South London. And it was awesome. It was a really good, somewhere in the pandemic Hulu release, and totally different than this, but I thought he was incredible. So I had a great time at this. I think the performances are really fun. The action set pieces are, of course, insane, but really fun. Like, if you buy in, then they follow their own rules and you can have a good time even if it's kind of absurd. So I strongly recommended this. I in fact already recommended it to friends and to mixed results, which I'll get into in a minute. PT, how are you feeling about it?
Well, first, I just want to say the only additional thing for David Johnson is the HBO show Industry, which he was on for a couple of years before Rye Lane, which I've never actually watched, but I know the people who are into it are very into it and they love him in it. So he has a sort of interesting triangulation of Industry, Rye Lane, Alien Romulus to like start off his career. And I had a really great time with this. I left the theater on a high, being like easily third best Alien movie, which again, after how I praised the two that I love, all-time movies for me, that means quite a bit. The thing that we'll dig into that it has gnawed at me a little bit is that after having discussed that the franchise has always sort of gone off into weird little outskirts and tried different things and had different approaches, the franchise nostalgia components to this movie do sort of feel it kind of like an anchor at times. They're soft and warm and comforting, but then they're also sort of like, oh, but is it constricting? But to frame it in a way that I know we have on our sheet, we'll talk about more later. We've discussed on the show many times, because we're very Star Wars focused. Star Wars is going to come up a lot when we talk about Alien. That does this have sort of Force Awaken-itis of being a nostalgia thing? I kind of feel like Romulus is like that first act of The Force Awakens, which we've discussed, is really, really good at remixing Star Wars. And even though you kind of see all the pieces are there, but you're like, well, this is so interesting and it's a new story and a new place with new people. This is good. And then The Force Awakens gets shaky when the old characters show up. Well, like, a slight spoiler about there's not a lot of characters that can be around in this movie from the previous Alien movies, because that's how Alien movies work. And so you kind of get that sensation the whole way through, where it is a remix and you can see all the beats and all the instruments being brought in and moved around, but because it always feels pretty new, it's still a really good time. So if these are the kind of movies you could be interested in and you're not absolutely totally burnt out on any legacy sequel, I think you could have a really good time with this. We've somehow taken short take and morphed it into recommendation algorithm, but that's okay. Jen, what's your short take / recommendation on this?
So I thought this movie was, and obviously the caveat is I'm not a horror expert by any means, and I was, very reluctant to go see this movie. But I felt like it was a pretty good time. I think what's really interesting to me is that the things I did not like about this movie were the fan service. And I don't know if that's because I don't have enough of an attachment to be like, yeah. I had a similar thing where I'm like, is this how other people feel about Star Wars movies, where it's like they recycle lines from other things, and I get really happy, but other people are like, this is so silly. And it really took me out of the experience of the movie and I had only, maybe it was also because I had just walked out of my house having watched 3/4 of Alien and not having seen Aliens. And so a lot of the one-liners really fell super flat, where I was like, what? This is really weird, because I didn't have that, because it didn't make me pump my fists, right, in a way that a true fan would. And I felt like the crew, the characters were pretty thin. I really, really liked Kaylee Spaney and David Johnson's rapport. Like, I thought that's the part of the movie I grabbed onto story-wise, where their sibling relationship was really strong. And I thought the most interesting parts of the movies were the ones that revolved around the Andy character. I did think that Kaylee Spaney was a very credible action star, especially in the third act. I was like, yes, like, put her in more action movies. Like, she's so tough but vulnerable. Like, she was checking all the boxes for me in terms of action hero star. And yes, Greg's pointing to his handle where he says "See Civil War" already. Yeah, I'm sure she's like that, like that in that too. Sorry, I still haven't seen that movie. It's a movie lost to time for me. Though I have heard more and more critics sort of playing it up, like being like, everyone slept on this movie. So you're not wrong, Greg. You're on the right side of history. But yeah, so I think overall, I thought this was pretty solid. I do think it's ties to the franchise and the fan service parts of it. And I hate using that term, especially pejoratively, but I think that was really holding it back from what it could do. I did think that, we haven't mentioned the director's name, Fade Alvarez, right? Is that?
I think it's Fade.
Fade? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought his direction of the action sequences was really good. There's a lot of like inventiveness in the action and kind of clever, like, oh, here are the rules that we've established. Like now we're going to have to figure out how to work around the rules, right? I thought that was really fun. It kind of kept me engaged, especially kind of as mayhem broke loose in the movie. So yeah, that's my general thing. Like, so I'm probably the lowest of the three of us, weirdly, because I'm like, it's too reliant on the rest of the franchise for my enjoyment of it, because I have no attachment to the franchise. It seems like a weird thing to say, but here I am.
Well, I think we should go to the recommendation algorithm.
Yes.
Recommendation algorithm. Beep boop beep boop beep boop boop.
Greg, we had the sound. You didn't need to make the sound.
Sorry.
We're just going to slowly replace all the sounds with just Greg doing the sounds.
Yes. I support this.
So I actually would position myself pretty close to Jen, that I had seen those two Alien movies once a piece, enjoyed them, but like didn't see a revival screening, was in my living room probably half looking at my phone when I saw them the first two times. So I'm sure there's a huge amount of kind of fan servicey references that I just flew right by, no problem. And so I bring this up because I was like, this movie's awesome. And one of my really good friends saw it with his teenage sons and was like, yes, this movie's awesome. And we convinced a couple buddies to go, and they went together, and they both hated it. They were like, this is a really decent sci-fi movie with really crappy aliens like paint all over it. And so I am not exactly sure if this is exactly fitting with all those friends, and I certainly don't want to misrepresent their views, hence they'll remain nameless. But it seemed to me that in my kind of anecdotal friend group, the more attached you were to this franchise, the kind of worse experience you had. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I would still say, especially now that we're deep into the theatrical run, if you're catching this on pay-per-view, I think you could do a lot worse than a night watching this if you've liked that brand and you can handle the kind of scary and minor body horror. I'm just gonna bracket and say I've been trying to keep up with the like most popular list on Netflix this summer, and so I have seen like a lot of really like messed up stuff that like made me go like, this movie's not so bad. Like, oh, this level of blood and gore, that's fine. Like compared to what I saw in I'll leave the titles blank. Yeah, it's not so bad. But I don't know. You can't be squeamish. Is certainly the line I would draw with friends and family. PT, what are you thinking? Who are you sending to this movie?
I would say I would disagree slightly about that it's like a sort of a straight line up of like the bigger you are into the franchise, the more frustrated you'll be. I think it's more of a, I don't know if we want to say a bell curve or like a valley curve, an inverted bell curve maybe, where the people I know who are like, well, the eighth book in the third series about the xenomorphs is actually the one that I think you'll like because it's set on a medieval planet. Those people loved it, like they were really into it. So if you're super duper duper into it, I think that you'll like it. If you're like, I think it's if you're really burnt out by nostalgia, then you're gonna be like, oh yeah, this is where you shoehorned in like something from one of the other movies. But I do think, and I wouldn't, again, I'm not all the way at the end there, but I like these movies enough. I have watched the first two Alien movies, at least a couple dozen times over the course of my life, where I'm like, the people who made this set out to make an Alien movie. This isn't like they made a spaceship movie and someone was like, we'll only make it if you slap aliens into it. Like this has the DNA of someone who is trying to make an alien movie, for better or worse. And it is Fede Alvarez who did a very credible job of doing a similar franchise like advancement by doing an Evil Dead movie, the first one after the original Sam Raimi trilogy, and made some similar interesting choices that had a bunch of callbacks, but also was kind of doing its own thing. And so yeah, I think that it's really unless you're just really sick of nostalgia, you don't have to be someone that's like really pumped to see those sneakers, which I recognize the sneakers. So I'll I will acknowledge that and be like, ooh, look at that panel on the wall. That's the same panel from, like, you don't have to be at that level, but you might be someone who is going to be rolling their eyes so hard at like, oh, that's something, even if you hadn't seen the original movies, this reference to Alien, like it's annoying that like that's being shoved in your face. I think it's forgivable because there's enough other good things in there, but that is the big stumbling block. As well as something else that I feel like we can't talk about till we get to spoiler mode, but there is another component of the movie that is in the sort of legacy sequel nostalgia stuff that I think if you find those frustrating, you're going to find this particularly frustrating. So just be aware if that's who you are, maybe tread cautiously.
I mean, I feel like I have a relatively high tolerance for that in general, and this made no sense to me. And I actively was irritated. I was like,
oh, you mean the thing? Yeah, no, I think
the thing we can't talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've listened to the director talk about why they made the choice. And I just think it's ultimately a bad choice. And, it's up to an individual how much it's going to bother you. But yeah, we can't discuss it yet. But Jen, all I will say before I hand it back to you is those moments where you were like, oh, this is dumb. Like, this is a weird callback. I also thought there were some really bad callbacks. So you like, it wasn't your newness to these movies. Like a couple of them were really bad and got really bad reactions, at least when I saw it. Like people were groaning and being like, okay. Whereas like they were really locked in on a lot of the just pure, tension and other moments.
So the thing I will say though is this movie is at its best when it's leaning into pure horror, and that's again a weird thing for me to say, someone who actively does not seek out horror and doesn't really like it. But I felt like that's when it sort of like just forgot that it was an alien movie almost, or that it had to be tying into this franchise, and sort of was just giving us like pure sort of like visceral, this is a scary thing that's happening in space right now kind of moments, you know what I mean? And it was more about just the action and the moment as opposed to all this other stuff. So I will say that if you are a horror fan, definitely go see this. I think you'll enjoy it. if you are a sci-fi fan, like a hard sci-fi fan, but not a horror fan, I think this will frustrate you because there's like the glimpse of another movie that is like a more dystopian, hard sci-fi movie that I'm not gonna lie, I was excited by in the first act, and I was like, "Ooh, what is this?" Like District 9, but with minors, and like what's going on? And then it's not that. It's like that's just a tease. So
that Jen is excited about people who work in mines. Just to be clear,
Yes. Not just young
not
people,
underage
not
children,
underage
Yeah.
individuals, but
like coal miners, like
yes,
yeah.
yeah. I will. Your recommendation is your recommendation. I will suggest a tweak, which is this movie works best when it's a thriller, which is frequently a thriller in a horror context. But I think that's the interesting sort of overlap in the old movies is like the original Alien is a thriller set, that's a horror, kind of a horror one set in space. Aliens is an action thriller that's like obviously set in space, but is also, it has the sort of war guys and guns and blah, blah, blah. And so I actually could see people who are like, well, I'm a horror fan and I want to go and see a horror movie. This wouldn't be horror enough for them because it's more of like what's creeping around the corner and not like what's the, I don't know, like what's jumping out all the time. There's not enough jumping out for like true horror heads. And I know you don't understand that, Jen. I know there is, but I'm just going to say, I think it is a little bit more like in the vibe of, what mysteries are lurking around here, as opposed to like, how am I about to imminently be slaughtered? Which is how I always sort of think about the distinction between horror and thriller. Maybe that's just my definition. So, but just to, again, for all those people.
I'll go so far as to say I think it's a mix between those two things. I think it can be a mix of those two things. But I don't know. For me, and again, keep in mind where I'm coming from with this. I haven't seen all the horror movies that Greg has seen. But like this was icky and like scary, and things were coming out of places I didn't want them to. Like I don't know what to tell you. Like this is a horror movie. Anyway, I think we need to go into spoiler mode. We're kind of dancing around this a little bit too much. So if you have not seen Alien Romulus and you do not want it spoiled, and I would say if you have not seen, like me, most of the Alien movies, we could be spoiling them, right? Like we could, especially the first two. I think at least I can say I will speak about those in detail when talking about Alien Romulus as kind of like the relationship between those films. So like, yeah, if you are just like, you go watch all the Alien movies and then come back, I guess, years later to listen to this.
It's just 9 movies and like 3 of them are good.
Right. Because we've almost talked about it and had to not talk about it a couple times already, can we just talk about Ian Holm? Like,
or not Ian Holm, as the case may be.
Yeah.
Bilbo Baggins? He's in this? But Jen, that actor is deceased. How could he possibly be in this movie?
What are you saying? There's zombies in my Alien movie?
Okay, so I have like a maybe ignorant question.
I bet it's not. Why? I bet it's actually the best question that Fede Alvarez should have asked himself.
Okay, so in Alien, we leave the character of Ash, played by Ian Holm, a human. Well, not in the movie. He's a human actor playing an artificial person, I should specify. Right. We leave him, he's been torn in half. His milky innards are spilling out, right? And this movie shows not the same character, but a clone of that character in the same exact position, also ripped in half with milky innards hanging out.
Yes. Well,
so why? Because they're not the same. Because I actually thought, like, wait a minute, did I miswatch Alien?
No.
Did I not remember what happened to him?
I think it's intentionally a little confusing. But I think the confusion is the Alien Romulus Aliens quick rewatch. So Ash, this is so dumb. I'm sorry I'm getting into this, but Ash has his head knocked off by Parker, played by Yaphet Kotto, with a fire extinguisher. And so you see his head like sitting next to his body, and he has that last conversation. It's Bishop, who is the robot slash synth, I forget the exact term they like to use, in Aliens, who is split in half by the alien queen. So I think the idea is that he was
Took a
Rook,
little bit of
who
column
is
A
like
and column B.
that Rook, yeah, Rook is the sort of another off the rack version of the Ash android, but the one that was stationed on this ship as the science officer got killed in the same way that Bishop was killed, which is like tail through the midsection and then grabbed and ripped in half. Like, you know, grab the arms, grab the legs, pulled to two sides, and that happened to him. But it's also kind of just like, remember there's a robot, and remember he kind of looked like this, but then there's another one that kind of looked like this when he got torn in half. Anyway, he's here. And that's who it was.
Well, which is Fassbender in those movies, that we have multiple Fassbendi in those movies that are the same. So like, I think there is a language of synths that you're supposed to translate there that you didn't.
That it's not weird that there's different versions of the same model like happen to look like that. But the thing that's weird to me is the whole point, or not the whole point, but one of the big points about Ash in the original Alien is no one knows. Like, they're on this ship with him, and it's a real big surprise when suddenly they're like, oh my God, he's a robot. And you know, he doesn't just care because he's a company man, he's a company robot. And so that's a surprise. So then it's like, was this ship like a special ship where they'd be like, oh, we'll give you, like, everyone here knows who the robots are? Or is it that there's the same looking robot on every ship, which seems like a bad distribution model? Because if you ever go to a different ship, you might see someone that looks exactly the same with it. It just raises all these questions that within the universe of the movie that seem unnecessary, when in addition to that, you have is it creepy to resurrect a dead actor and put him in a movie? Like, that feels icky.
Yeah, I guess the question I should have asked which maybe was the question you were anticipating, the overall question, because that was a very granular, like, replaying in the moment what I was thinking, like being confused. But my overall question is just like, why does this artificial person have to have Ian Holmes' CG generated face? Like, why? What does that contribute to the story other than just bringing him back and being like, remember him from the other movie? Like, which again, if you have to go through so many lengths to actually technologically do that with the effects, and it actually doesn't even look very good, it looks very uncanny valley. Which I don't know. Like, if they really wanted to do that, why couldn't they just have like a hologram of him on a TV screen, or like, which probably would have looked slightly better, or like
it did look better
like just his
when
voice,
they had that.
just his
like
voice.
Yeah, it seems very strange. I mean, I will say, as someone, the person most into this, I would have been maybe a little bit annoyed if it was like, we found this recording of Ash talking about what happened on the Nostromo, and it would be like, well, I don't know how you could have that. The Nostromo blew up within like hours of them. I don't know what the realism of this is. Like, I would have gotten uppity about that too. I think the issue is, it's very Jurassic Park. They spend so much thinking about if they could, they didn't think about if they should. That, like, they're like, well, we could do this, and then it would be this callback. And it does have this like moment where you're like, oh, is this the robot from the old movie? Because they just have him. He's in the science officer blue uniform. He has the face. It doesn't always look great, but like, you can tell that's what's supposed to happen. You're like, well, this is Uncanny Valley, resurrected Ian Holm. I guess this is Ash. And then after like a few minutes, he's like, well, my name is Rook. And I'm like, my name, basically he says, I'm not Ash, I'm Rook. I'm a different character who just has a very similar background to Ash. Can we go forward now? And then they keep going with the movie. And so it does feel like it's just a sort of nostalgic poke. And plus that little moment of confusion about, well, what's actually happened here. Because, as you may or may not have realized, Jen, because you hadn't finished the movie, you haven't finished the original movie when you saw Romulus. The opening of Romulus is them recovering the alien in space from it's sort of encased in space debris from having been killed in at the end of Alien. Spoiler for Alien. So it's sort of like, well, did they recover Ash? I think they wanted that confusion. I listened to Fede Alvarez talk to Sean Fennessy on The Big Picture. Maybe you both did as well, or maybe someone did. But his explanation there was basically that they did set up with Michael Fassbender that there are multiple versions of the same android robot in the world, and Ian Holm's the only one who didn't get to come back because, spoiler for the movie Jen hasn't seen yet, Lance Hendrickson as Bishop does come back in Alien 3 as the sort of torn in half Bishop.
I could have guessed that.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about what you could or couldn't guess about Alien 3 sometime. But there's but Bishop is there, and and so he's like, well, wouldn't it be great to give Ian Holm a chance to come back? And he also kind of pitched it as like, we talked to Ian Holm's family, and Ian Holm's estate said that he kind of felt like he was ignored by Hollywood after like the Lord of the Rings. And so like, we're sort of giving him another moment, which kind of felt like, I actually was kind of annoyed that he said that, where it's like, wasn't he sick? Like, didn't he have, like, he was sick for the last like 10 years of his life. And also he's still dead. Like, that's not a reason to put him in the movie. It just felt like the legacy sequel thing of, we can bring back this character. Like, it would sort of make sense to bring back the person who could be from an assembly line. So why don't we do that? And that like got checkboxes from all the people at the studio to be like, yes, good. We can't bring back Sigourney Weaver. We can't bring back Tom Skerritt and Harry Dean Stanton, but we can bring back Ian Holm. Good. Why don't we do that? And I think it was a huge mistake. And I know people who went to see it that were like, it was fun. I hated Ian Holm being in it so much, like beyond the, like, I didn't like that presence. I didn't like the execution. They're like, they want to set it up so that we never have new actors ever again. They're just going to have CGI versions of old actors in perpetuity. That's what the studio wants. They don't have to pay people to act. And that's an extreme reaction, but there are people who felt that way. And so I feel like it just, the gains that the movie got from it were nowhere near the costs. So it's a bummer.
Greg, how did you feel about this?
I think this is a case where my lack of clear nostalgia helped me, because I knew Ian Holm was in the first one, and I could immediately tell that this was both Ian Holm and not at all Ian Holm. And so I kind of, obviously pieced together that he was a robot. And I was spending the time kind of, I guess how you were saying, Jen, being like, wait, what happened to him in Alien? Did he die? Was he, like, in the theater, I could convince myself he was the John Hurt role in Alien, because I don't have that deep an attachment. PT is not, kindly not rolling his eyes at me, but that's just the level I was at. I was like, oh yeah, like, all right, I remember he was in that. And then I thought the film itself explained it, that I could understand, oh, this is another version of that robot. And I had not yet seen that Fassbender plays two versions of the same robot, so I didn't even have that to work on. I'm really enjoying this segment, which I think we should call Jen and Greg Ask PT Stupid Questions. So I want to continue with my stupid questions. So you hit on one of them already, which was the level of like how this came between the two movies, which is that I picked up on that. This was the xenomorph that Sigourney Weaver fought in her underwear at the end and blasted out into space, and then they recovered that one. Remind me, Ripley is then in her sleeping pod. Would they have recovered her in that moment and just shipped her to a different space station, or is she blasting off somewhere?
She's still lost. For the duration of Alien Romulus, they don't know that Ripley's alive, because she gets in the like sort of scout pod, or I guess technically it's an escape pod, but I think it's the same ship they use to go down to the surface of the planet in the movie. So she leaves, she blows up the big ship behind her, the alien has crept. We're just totally spoiling Alien now. If anyone's hanging around, the aliens crept onto that ship.
We said we were going to do it.
We
so
did,
you're
and
fine.
we're not holding back. Then the fourth act is the alien is on that ship. There's she pushes out the airlock, and then the beginning of Aliens is she's found, and the sort of story is, you thought you were gonna hit the like a space where someone would find you after like 10 months, but you went off course and you went way off into the middle of nowhere. You've been gone for almost 60 years. And so part of Aliens is she's like, no one, like her family's gone, like everyone she ever knew is not around anymore. And so she's sort of stuck. But don't worry, there's a found family coming. We'll get into that another time. But yeah, so Ripley doesn't exist as far as anyone knows. Like they just think everyone on that ship blew up when the ship blew up.
And then the one other thing I'm putting in the ask stupid questions category, I thought this film made a big deal about like, this is Romulus, and Romulus is the name of one of the two twins. And I did not understand if Remus is the sequel opportunity or the other half of the spaceship. Then one of my friends told me that is part of something that links into Prometheus, which kind of sounds like Remus, but is not the word Remus. So what's the connection I'm supposed to make there, or is there no connection there? What do we have?
This is what I know, and I will admit I only know this for certain from reading the Wikipedia page for Alien Romulus in preparation for this episode. The ship that they go to, and for those who are listening who are fine with us spoiling the other movies, but are like, what happened in Alien Romulus? This collection of miners, NERS, people who work in mines, are like, well, we're stuck in these contracts, and we don't know, we're going to be stuck in these mines until we die. Like people in our family have died. They mention over and over again. And so they're like, we're going to go up. There's a ship that just sort of is kind of just hanging in orbit around our planet. We're going to go steal it because we think it should have the cryosleep pods where we can go to sleep and travel to a distant planet where we can be free and be like free citizens living our lives. And so they go up and they break onto the ship. That ship is not called Romulus. That ship is called the Renaissance. And the Renaissance has two sides. One is Romulus, one is Remus. I don't remember where the like distinction is of like what parts of it are Romulus and what parts of it are Remus, but that's the confusion. It's called Alien Romulus, even though that's only one of the three potential names for the ship that they're on. I mean, thinking back a little bit to presage the rhetorical situation and our little academic corner. I mean, I guess my vague knowledge of Roman mythology is, Romulus wins, Romulus beats Remus, and it carries forward and is able to found Rome. So I guess it's the characters who survive are the ones who are the Romulus in this equation. But yeah, I don't think, because everything blows up, I don't think it's going to be Alien Remus if there is a sequel, though that feels like that would have been a smart idea.
Thank you.
So this might be too generous, but I feel like the Romulus and Remus thing has to be about twins.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, the first thing I think of is Rain and Andy. I feel like they're not twins, right? Because they don't look the same, but they are brother and sister, and one is a human and one is an artificial person. And I feel like there's something there potentially in terms of like artificial people being a simulation or a simulacrum of humans, and like one kills the other or something, like they can't coexist, or one has to kill the other I don't know. But again,
yeah,
none of that might have been intentional.
to the degree I recall, like it feels like, having not really studied Roman mythology, that part of there are these twins and they're there together is Rome could only be founded and grow and become the power it was because someone was killed for it. Like Remus had to die. If Rome and Rheims were both founded as two cities next to each other, it wouldn't have gotten as big as Rome did. So there's something about sort of the sacrifice of someone.
Right, and Andy is supposed to be sacrificed, right? They go on this mission knowing that that's what they will have to do, because they're just using him for the access codes or whatever, and that he won't be able to go with them to paradise, right? Like, so
there it is.
And also worth noting that there's six six minors who are on this quest. It's 3 sets of siblings, which I will admit I did not fully grasp as it was unfolding. It's Rain and Andy, and then Tyler's the one who was Rain's ex-boyfriend who ropes them in. The pregnant woman is Tyler's sister, Kay, and then Bjorn is their cousin, who I think is also the dad. So we can dig into that if we want to.
He's the one who's like the jerk, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the pilot is the adopted sister of Bjorn, Navarro. So they're technically also like there as siblings. I don't know how adopted that is or whatever. But yeah, the jerky guy, who apparently is also kind of into incest, like a little bit, like at least first cousin incest. Or maybe it's further away. But yeah, that's the setup. Is it's 3 siblings. So I guess that's there. And then all these aliens are also sort of like, are they like brothers to humans because of they get like birthed in human bodies and then jump out? Like, are they sort of siblings that are aiming to kill to grow their society as Rome may have done? I don't know, maybe.
And it's also the philosophy of like, for humans, this is Rook's stance, right? The company's mission is we can't survive as humans. We need to evolve, and so we have to kill like our humanity and become more like the xenomorphs, so that we can be more perfect organisms, right? Like, so maybe that's it too. Is like the in order to make Rome flourish, in order for the human civilization to survive and flourish in this universe, we have to kind of kill ourselves, right, or half of ourselves. I don't even know.
Push ourselves to evolve. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like humans are no longer humans. Like the nightmare fuel that is the last hybrid at the end, whatever that thing is. The
Offspring. I don't know what it's called. The Offspring, apparently.
Okay. Officially. Sure. He looks like if Voldemort got really tall. Basically.
Well, he's got engineer vibes from Prometheus as well. Like he has almost like there's the descendant of, we've circled back around to that maybe. But yeah, just real creepoid there at the end.
So anyway, so that's one possible reading, but I feel like in the movie there's nothing about that. Like there's nothing in the movie that would like I am heavily placing an interpretation upon that to try to make all of this make sense.
So having revisited, I had only revisited Prometheus and watched for the first time Alien Covenant before going to see this. I never really need to revisit Alien or Aliens. That sort of perpetually exists in my mind. But then the other two, I hadn't gone back to for since Prometheus came out. And when I left Romulus, I was pumped. I was excited. I think it's really good and enjoyable. I do wonder is it the most shallow movie in this franchise because of some of these things that you're saying, that like in the other movies, even when they're not particularly successful to me, in my opinion, they're trying to wrestle with stuff in a way that is like there. And you're just sort of like, well, that's definitely in the text. It's trying to do something. I don't know if this is working, but it's trying. Whereas this kind of feels a little bit more just like, it's twins. Anyway, this thing's lurking and there's a thing in the wall. And I love the thing in the wall. Like, what if that comes and gets me? But I don't know if it has the thematic depth and resonance that some of the other movies were able to bake in. To whatever degree the movies are successful, at least that stuff is there. So I don't know. It doesn't make me necessarily want to, mark it down any further, but I can see how that could be disappointing, especially to Greg's earlier point. If you're very deep into the books, the comics, and you think about this lore a lot, is it like the fact that it's like, oh, what does Romulus mean? And the answer is sort of like kind of nothing. Then maybe that would be a letdown. I don't know.
Is it a misreading to suggest that is what Sir Ridley wants these movies to be about, and the studio is much more into the like, let's just have xenomorphs do scary things?
There is a thread of people out there who I've not seen get like super obnoxious, but I have seen just in film discourse online who are like, well, Disney bought 20th Century Fox. What do you expect? They're just gonna make like they're gonna stay in the lane and they're gonna make the movie that's just like another version of the movie that you liked before. And whereas when Ridley was back, he was like, let's get nuts and let's talk about creation and let's talk about, where do things come from and build this lore and this mythology, which is all stuff that I thought was unsuccessful in those two movies. And that's my opinion. Some people really like them and connected with it. Some people like those but don't care as much about the old ones, and that's great as well. I do respect them. I respect that they were doing it. Again, I do feel like there's a connection that can be made with Prometheus and Covenant in that prequel trilogy pocket of the person who was there at the beginning saying like, what if we really mess around with this? And folks being like, no, I don't like that, including me being like, I don't care about that. That's not what I want. Like I wanted more of what was happening. And then someone coming in later after a corporate handover being like, more of the same. And me being like, yes, please, thank you, and enjoying it. So I do think there are strong Force Awakens parallels to this.
Well, and the other name that I feel like should be said, Damon Lindelof, because Prometheus feels very much like a Damon Lindelof project. And I forget what exactly his credit is on that. I think he got screenwriting credit or maybe story by. And so, it very much felt like Damon Lindelof came in and kind of did the Lost Mystery Box thing a little bit. And that's something I enjoy. And I have enjoyed everything. It also felt very much like his Watchmen in that kind of same way. Like, let's really blow out this mythology in a weird, different way. And you'll be surprised how it connects back to the mythology, So, I like that about those movies, and I think we're in agreement that it was a nice approach to franchise. The kind of course correction back to, but we know what you're really here for, does feel a little bit like a cop-out, but at the same time, I certainly found Romulus to be the most successful of those movies. So if I'm voting with my dollars, I'd be voting for more Romulus than I would be, more whatever the prequel trilogy is known as.
Yeah. Janet, would it be okay if I try to, in a very condensed thing, talk my origin of Alien thing?
Go for it.
I think, because to me, when I was looking through all this stuff, I was trying to not make this, let's just talk about the whole franchise. But in thinking about this big pushback of Romulus but it's just sort of more of the same. And
yeah, I was going to say the movie Alien Romulus has put us in this position. So I
has. And so I think it's kind of important when looking at it to think of how it really was this amalgam of a bunch of different ideas and thoughts and efforts from a lot of different directions and people, that in a way that I don't think when you watch the movie you see it. Like, Star Wars is going to continue to be important in this, in what I'm going to say. But I think when you see Star Wars, if when we were kids and we saw it, so maybe we didn't pick up on it. But if you have seen almost any other movie, you would be like, oh, well, of course, this is from, this is a Western and this part's kind of like a samurai. And Alien is doing that too, but it doesn't necessarily, I feel like it feels subtler to me in a way that I was surprised going back to it. So in thinking about how Alien came to be, there are 3 movies that are important sort of touchstones along the way. 2 of them exist and 1 of them does not. The first one is a movie called Dark Star, which is a movie that started at USC. This is also very USC Cinema School relevant. And it was a student film created by 2 students, undergrads at USC, John Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon. And they were like, we want to make a 2001 if the people on the ship in 2001 were hippies. And then it became, well, if they were hippies, they wouldn't like their job. So then it's like, well, they're on like a decrepit ship that doesn't really like what they're doing. And so that was sort of the idea. And they worked on that and they made this film. And Dan O'Bannon did a lot of the, like, here are the characters and here's the sort of like quirks of the technology and all that. And John Carpenter was like, I want to look, this dealt with the visuals and the blocking and the very sort of technical aspects of it. It was a very successful student film, but as they both would say later, they're like, well, the problem is we made it was like 45 minutes, which is too long to be a short film, as we may know from our Henry Sugar background with Wes Anderson, that 39-minute short film to make sure it fit the requirements. It's got to be under 40 minutes to go to short film festivals, but it's only 45 minutes, so it's not long enough to be a feature film. So they said, well, who could we look to in the early 1970s out of USC for inspiration? And they said, of course, it's their former classmate, George Lucas, who had taken his student short film THX 1138, got more money, and made a feature film version of it. So they made a feature film version of Dark Star, but with a guy who was really into interfering and was like, throw out some of the stuff you did and do other things too, like make some more things, change things. And so they had to add a bunch of stuff to like please this guy and get his money. And one of the things that was added was having the character of Pinback. Shout out that inspired the name of a great little indie rock band, if anyone out there cares. But Pinback, who was played by Dan O'Bannon, ends up with this supposed to be humorous side story in the movie where they have captured an alien that is on the ship that he is treating as a pet who just always wants to escape and kill him. And so he always is trying to go and feed this alien, and the alien like scurries out of the locker room and then is trying to push him down elevator shafts. And it's supposed to be this like comical thing. If you out there in listening land want to Google Dark Star movie Alien to see what this looks like, then that will show why it was played for comedy. It's a beach ball with feet. That's all they had money for. It's just a beach ball with dots drawn on it and some feet attached. So when they put it out, when they screened it in the theater, they were like, this movie's not good anymore. Like the filmmakers were like, this movie's no longer good. But Dan O'Bannon was like, I was trying to make this funny, but no one's laughing. And I feel like he has a like, very, very full of himself approach. All due respect to Dan O'Bannon. People who all worked with him said he's really difficult to work with. But that he was very like confident that he was always right. And this was a situation where it wasn't working. So his takeaway was not that he had done anything wrong, but that comedy is too hard for him. That comedy is too individual. That everyone has their own thing they find funny, but everyone's afraid of the same things. So he's like, I want to do this story again, but at like that version, that's sub story as a scary movie. So then that becomes, he starts working on a scary movie of this. He teams up with a guy who sees Dark Star and likes it, who has bought the rights to a Philip K. Dick story, which he and O'Bannon start to work on together. Eventually, almost 20 years later, becomes Total Recall. That's a different podcast, but that they're working on that as well, and they're developing this story. Then O'Bannon, because of Dark Star, gets hired to write on Jodorowsky's Dune, which, as we know from our Dune episodes, never happens. But through that, he meets the artists that have been hired to design the space stuff of Dune. And Jodorowsky was like, I want different music and different designs for different planets. And the Harkonnen planet was going to be designed by H.R. Giger, who was this guy who did these weird biomechanical arts from a castle in Switzerland. And he just seems like a completely insane person. And he was doing album covers for rock bands. And O'Bannon met him and was like, well, this guy is wild. Like, this is great. I want the aliens to look like this. And so he comes back and is like, okay, I have this idea. And there's all these different inspirations that I'm not going to get into because I'm already talking too much, but they start picking from these different movies and these different, like they had a story idea about gremlins attacking a World War II bomber, and the gremlins take out the crew one by one as like a sort of Twilight Zone type thing. And I think it became a segment in the Heavy Metal movie, which is this animated anthology. So like that became, okay, well, the alien comes and attacks the crew. And they sort of pieced all these things together. And then the third movie that matters is Star Wars, of course, because then they had this idea out there and the studio was like, we want to make a sci-fi movie, another sci-fi movie. It's going to take Lucas 3 years to do another one. What's the sci-fi script we have? And this was it. And so it went through a bunch of potential directors really quickly, and it landed on Ridley Scott, who had only made one movie, which was a French Napoleon era historical epic that he had made. that somehow he got the money to make because he had made these really popular commercials in England. I don't know how the movie business works. It's really weird. And then Ridley comes on and is like, great, I'm going to write backstories for all of these characters, like for myself, and then gave them to the actors once the actors were cast. And then when they were rehearsing, he filmed all the rehearsals to see how they interacted. And he particularly saw like who became friends and who didn't like each other. And basically everyone didn't like Sigourney Weaver because Sigourney Weaver was like the daughter of the president of a TV network who had not been in movies before, really. And everyone else had like a bunch of credits to their name. So they all kind of were like disrespecting her. So they set up a bunch of the like that all the characters are sort of always rolling their eyes at Ripley because the actors were all rolling their eyes at Sigourney Weaver. And then as they were filming it, he was like, you know what? We shouldn't just end this movie with the ship blowing up. There should be another beat with the alien scaring her again when everyone thinks everything's fine. And so that's the sort of fourth act idea. So he wrote and sketched out and asked for more money and got like $1 million to do an extra week of shooting to do the final thing on the escape pod, which, I mean, that's not like the most iconic, I guess, but that's like I think that's an important part of the story. So all of which is to say, and for better or for worse, there's plenty more here to dig into about how it all came together. It is all these different pieces and all these different people who came in. It's like the producing company that brought them to 20th Century Fox were the ones that were like, what if there's a robot? What if there's a cat? What if there's a computer that talks? Like that, like there's all these different pieces that like came from like 30 different folks had to all be there and come together to make this movie that feels pretty cohesive and feels like someone sat down and had this idea and brought it together. And Ridley gets treated as sort of the auteur, but it is all these different folks with all these steps along the way. All of which is to say that like this sort of revulsion to how dare someone come in and make a new Alien movie and put their own spin on it. And maybe there's other folks in producing it that add things. But that's kind of how it's always worked. And that's how these have always been made. So, it doesn't always end up successful. You can get into Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection to see how it doesn't work when too many people are trying to bounce around ideas. But at least for the original movie, that's how it came together. And I think that that's something to keep in mind when being worried about the sort of studio guided production process for these legacy movies like this. The end. I'm done.
Whew. So I feel like this was your Charlie Day conspiracy theory wall meme, and I love it. That is really crazy. I do feel like I have to share the really weird way in which Alien Romulus spoils the end of Alien for me.
Yes.
Because the idea that, so as I said earlier, I didn't get to watch like the last 25 or 30 minutes of Alien. I had to go see Alien Romulus. The end of Alien Romulus is they think they're okay, right? And then what they don't realize is that Isabel Merced's character, who I think is named Kay, I want to say,
Yes.
they think they're all safe. They put her in the cryo chamber, and then the worst stuff in this whole movie happens, right? Like she births a weird hybrid alien, right? It's like, oh no, we weren't safe. And so because of that, when I went home and then put Alien back on, it was right at the time when like I get to the point where, Ripley's getting comfy and cozy. She's ready to go take a nap in the cryo chamber. And I was like, oh no. And like, that's what spoiled it for me. I was like, I knew that was going to happen because I was like, clearly Alien Romulus is ripping off of that beat, right? Of the, like, you thought you were safe. Everybody's lets their guard down. And then, whoa, there's another alien, right? So that was really funny to me. And I'm sure no one else has had that experience, right? Like, so this might actually be a good segue into the rhetorical situation, because the whole saga that you just brought up is really bringing up a question of authorship, which I feel like gets us into rhetorical situation. So I'm going to do it. The rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. In the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation, which is the name of the segment, refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. And so I feel like this idea that like SPT was sort of saying, like Ridley Scott gets credited with the first Alien movie, and like largely seems, if people credit one person with having ownership over this franchise, it's him, right? And everyone else is kind of going off book potentially. But is that accurate? Like, or does inherently a franchise have to be collaborative, right? Like, and especially with this franchise where like directors kind of go off and like one Romulus is more horror, right? Prometheus is more kind of cerebral sci-fi, right? Like, so yeah, what's going on with who is the author of the Alien franchise?
I think it's a really interesting question, and to me, you're speaking to maybe something obvious, which is the heart of like what fans want. Because, again, tell it to me like it's Star Wars. We keep, there's a lot of like consternation about the fact George Lucas doesn't control it anymore, right? And like, oh, did we want this one guy's vision? If you polled people in 1999, the predominant wisdom was get this away from George Lucas and let other voices take over. And the other prominent name in what you've been discussing from PTTU is also James Cameron, who, comes in, creates this absolute gangbuster sequel, and then I think gets some executive producer credit on the third one, I think, but is not very involved. And what does he do? He goes and creates Avatar, where he's like, I'm the man and I live in New Zealand and this is all I do and I control it all. And you'll watch 27 of these. And so it's really interesting to think about kind of these other franchises. And to me, this one stands apart as being more collaborative in that way. Now, we've just spent a long time talking about how messy that is. But would Alien and Aliens be what they are without somebody coming in and being like, well, the beach ball's dumb, do this Alien? Or, there should be robots in this, but they'll look like humans because that's cheap for the budget or what have you. Like, I think this franchise speaks to how much more rich it can be through collaboration and how much harder it is to collaborate and to find interesting ways into that. And I think, to me, as I've experienced these, Prometheus and Covenant speak to that, which is like, Prometheus is like, let's do something really wacky, and we've got some new voices. We got Lindelof, we got Ridley coming back. Let's really change it up. And then Covenant feels much more like, maybe we went a little too far. Maybe we did things a little too crazy. And I will say that I thought Covenant was better than its reputation, but it showed the kind of weight of collaboration that like, oh, too many cooks got into this and it really kind of killed the momentum again. PT, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there was a third one of those planned and they wanted to continue that, but then the kind of slowed momentum, they just bailed and moved on to Romulus.
Yeah, I don't know. It was planned in that it was sort of like, that's the sketch, is like, there'll be three of these movies, and then the third one will be leading into the original Alien. And it really was going to have sort of like the prequel trilogy with the original trilogy, even though it's a quadrilogy, as the DVD box famously dubbed it in a made-up word. There's 4 original Alien movies, and I don't really know the degree to which Ridley Scott or anyone involved in Prometheus cared about Alien 3 or Alien Resurrection, and potentially even Aliens, which like I think they were always just sort of like, sure, I don't know, whatever. Anything that happens after Alien, I don't care about. But yeah, when Prometheus was out and making money and getting praised, it was, we're going to do 3 of these. We might do a de-aged Sigourney Weaver for the end of the third one. Like, they were full of possibilities of what they might do. And then, yeah, after Covenant, that sort of petered out. But yeah, I think that you're right, Greg. And I think to add to it is, even when we think about like franchises that do have, people who are there, like Lucas with Star Wars and Cameron with Avatar, Feige with Marvel, who's not a director or a writer necessarily, but he's always thought of as like the linchpin person. I mean, there is a degree of, well, there's someone who makes the final decision. in the movies, but there's plenty of times where you can watch them, you can listen to interviews with them where they're giving credit to all their collaborators. I don't think George Lucas would ever be like, oh, like Star Wars didn't need John Williams or Ben Burt or the people of ILM or the actors or the editors. He might disregard the editors for the first movie because he had a bad divorce. But whatever. I think that they would recognize that there's a space for collaboration. But it is interesting. And part of it maybe just is the like Ridley always sort of potentially being someone who can come back. Because that's again not to go as deep as before, but Alien's very successful. There's a fight after it comes out because it makes like almost $100 million even for the late 70s, but Fox tries to tell the production company it was $5 million in the red. And so there was like a lawsuit that lasted 4 years before they could even talk about a sequel to figure out the money. And by that point, Ridley was like, I did Blade Runner. Like, I've moved on. I'm not doing another movie. And that's how it ends up being James Cameron. And then James Cameron is like, I kind of want to do a sequel, but I want, here are the things I want to do. And they're like, we don't want you to do that. We would like it to be, you go in a different direction. And he's like, forget it. I've got other stuff I'm going to work on. So the studio was like, get Ridley back. And then Ridley was like, I don't want to do it without Ripley being the main character. And they were like, we don't want to do that. And so that sort of begins the tension that leads to all these other movies. So it always was this rumor of Ridley might come back. And then he does. And he wanted to do the thing that I guess they were talking about even before Alien 3, which was let's go back and see where the aliens come from. And I think what they end up coming up with, the problem to me, and I'm softer, I'm more at peace with it. I was so excited when it came out because people were saying it was so good, and I was so let down when I saw this because I just thought all the answers or all the even the questions that they were raising were all very shallow and dumb and not handled very well. And again, people really like it, so I respect that there's folks out there who are really into it, but it just felt like the sort of metaphysical, like big sort of, what does it mean to be a creator? Where was creation? Where does life come from? It just felt like it was handled very poorly. And then you add in that Lindelof mystery box stuff, which I think just prolongs the attempt at tension with that when some stuff is revealed in the final like 15, 20 minutes is like, yeah, I know. Like, okay, when are we going to get to this meaning something? I thought that didn't come together very well. It's unfortunate that then the course correction in Covenant was, what about more aliens? Like, what if they were more like the original aliens? And we had a bunch of them. That didn't work that well either. So, yeah, I respect that Ridley wanted to push it in a different direction, and I like that he came back. It's interesting that there are people that are like, well, Sir Ridley's the guy. And then he's kind of hanging around this movie too in all the trailers, like him talking to Fede Alvarez, like, yes, I've passed the torch to you. Very much like James Cameron talking to whoever directed the latest crappy Terminator movie to be like, this one's the real sequel to Terminator 2. This is the one that does a good job. And it's like, okay, James, I don't believe you, but sure, whatever you say. So it is interesting, the attempts to sort of keep the authorship connected while also moving on from these auteurs.
So I have a provisional thesis to throw out here now based on what you're saying. So it feels like when you have a franchise, there's an intersection between the concept of intertextuality, which is this idea that no text exists in a vacuum, right? That like everything bounces off the other to create meaning, right? That nothing, you can't just have one alien movie by itself and say like, well, this is the one that does X, right? Inevitably, the other movies are kind of influencing people's interpretation of it. An intersection between that and the concept of the death of the author, right? Which is the idea that, well, an author's intention actually is meaningless. It is the viewer or the reader who is completely projecting their own, all of the context that they have and projecting that onto the meaning of a text to create meaning, right? And I feel like franchises take those two ideas and then says the idea that maybe it's the death of the auteur. Like the idea that an auteur can put its mark on a franchise and quote unquote, and I've heard lots of critics talk about Alien Romulus positively, this idea that like, oh, Fede Alvarez really was playing in the sandbox, right? So all these movies can exist in the Alien universe and play in the sandbox, but make a different sandcastle. Like one's a genre, one, they might be genre based. They could, one is doing the myth making thing of Prometheus, one is doing the more horror thing, one is doing an action thriller thing, right? And that the idea that each auteur can come to the franchise and kind of build their own little sandcastle in the sandbox, and that this idea is like, well, they don't actually get to do that because then by virtue of being a franchise, like there's too much interference, right? There's too many other texts, too many other things that inevitably that one movie has to be in conversation with, to the point where it can never just be their own creation.
I think that's good. Yeah. I think that's fair. And I think it's so inherently a collaborative process. And there's just inevitably, if it's any sort of a major movie release, like a feature film, I don't know if it would have to be this like somebody with a camera who also edits it, who also, wrote it. And, it would be this incredibly low budget thing to possibly not have a roster of collaborators, both, work pre-production, production, post-production, at various stages, some of whom are the kind of people people in suits who don't wear ties and sit in Burbank or the West Side and, take lunches and have meetings and are super annoying and have terrible ideas. They're part of it too, like whether we like it or not. Like they're the folks that want Back to the Future to be called Saucer Men from Mars. Like those people exist too, and they're part of the process, even if they're thankfully not listened to sometimes.
Well, and I was going to put that in slightly different terms and say, remember, the villain is capitalism, because that's what Alien Romulus taught us, and basically this whole franchise taught us. Because I do think that, Jen, your thesis works really well, but the auteur has to somehow survive kind of the three levels of corporate boards to get something made in this regard. When I'm thinking about this franchise, it has the problem of no single steering figure, like we were just talking about, and also characters that can't really sustain the whole franchise. And like in some regards that makes it closer to Marvel. And like Marvel had this great run where like the Russo brothers can come in and do Winter Soldier and say, let's really do a 70s thriller. And then we're in this moment now, the wobble, where it seems to be saying, well, we can't really do that. We have to deliver this Marvel experience. Or as sometimes is reported, like half the movie is written and storyboarded before the director even shows up because they have to start the previs on the visual effects and all that. And so I think were I a Hollywood auteur, I would really hesitate before signing up for one of these jobs. But it's not like there are other jobs. I mean, Star Wars, as much as I love it, famously kind of grabs these people, chews them up, and spits them out. And it takes Gareth Edwards 4 years before he's allowed to make another movie. And guess what? The creator doesn't do that well. So then he has to sign on for Jurassic Park and go back to Franchiseville, right? Like it's just the nature of the business right now. And I think it's a shame, but it's the only way. Like they're not paying for a Prometheus or an Alien Romulus style movie unless there's a franchise attached. So
because that's in the best
Wayland.
Interest of the company.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, the best interest of the company.
All of the directives are
yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I guess let's add like yet another layer on here, because I think this was a really juicy question we had in Rhetorical Situation as well. But the idea of like, what does an alien movie mean in a post AI world? And I think this question of authorship is totally relevant to the idea of AI, right? Like of like the extreme version being like, well, we could just have ChatGPT write these movies and amalgamate, all the other ones to make this the more perfect organism, right? So what? That's like really dark. I didn't mean to take us to a very dark place, but the I feel like you're right, Greg, that like at its core, this franchise really is about people getting swallowed up by corporate capitalism. And like, what is the relationship between that and artificial intelligence? And has that changed over time with these movies? Does it have to because of where we are now? You know what I mean? Like, I have so many questions.
The darkest thing about what you just said is it's hard for me to imagine that an AI couldn't have written Alien Romulus, because that's exactly what these elements feel like. And I know that's very insulting to the creatives behind it, and I'm sorry, but it's like the remixing of familiar elements is exactly what AI can do, right? And that maybe that's where our franchise entertainment is scarily headed. PT, I think you had something smarter to say though.
No, it's definitely dumber. What I think is interesting, and we're bringing up a good point that we're touching on, which I am frequently discussing in my letterbox reviews of these movies. I do feel like part of the reason why, especially those first two movies, work so well, but this does carry forward to the other ones, is this idea of like, yeah, there's a big monster like alien creature that is there and like wants to basically like sexually assault you and implant a seed inside you and then kill you from the inside out, and like has the body horror elements, and then will wipe everyone else out to continue that's bad. But then the exact same thing is happening, but with the company that has sent you out, and this capitalist group, this capitalist entity that is, by all of our understanding from not being at the center of it, is just running everything. And I mean, spoilers for Jen because she hasn't seen it. The third movie, which has does have a lot of good qualities to it. The third movie is they end up on a prison planet, and so they're on a prison that is all the prisoners have like started a cult. But the prison is run by Wayland Yutani. The prison is still run by the company, and it's still doing stuff for the company. So the company is everywhere, and the company is functionally what the alien is. It's just this self-perpetuating organism that is spreading out and consuming everything in order to grow itself and presumably get like 6% dividends for the shareholders. So I think that this movie coming back to that is why I like it so much more than Prometheus and Covenant. And like Prometheus has Wayland in it. It's got the guy at the, it has like the rich guy who's doing stuff, but I feel like having it be a guy who's the rich guy that's making this choice and putting people in this position doesn't have the same resonance to me as the sort of big omnipowerful company does. Again, it's good that they tried it. It's good that they tried something different. But I'm glad that they're back to it. I do think that the like synthetic AI being that is hidden around you and you don't realize it's there, and then when push comes to shove, he's there to like screw you over to do what the powers that be want, is a lot more resonant. Like that was a futuristic, scary concept in 1979, and now it's like, yeah, I guess I could be replaced by a large language model that could just spit out some of the content that I create, or they don't need me to draw illustrations for these technical manuals. They can ask, Dolly or whatever to do it for them. So I do think that it's more resonant. I do think, therefore, it is interesting that in Romulus, the AI character is maybe the most sympathetic out of all the characters that are in the movie. I kind of feel like that's, maybe is intentionally a choice, but and it's not to like whatever, to forgive the dehumanizing of technology, but I think that was smart to sort of not to lean into it so much where it becomes so obvious, but instead have it be like, but this is actually like along with Rain, this is the nicest person in the movie and the person who's the most empathetic to other people around him.
And I feel like it's very purposely set up in the movie that he is raised as a human, right? He's supposed to be a sibling to Rain. but also that his directive is not for the company, right? It is to protect what is best for Rain. And so he has almost the opposite impulse of the company. The company is always like, let's do what's best for this monolith, and the little guy, the crew is expendable, right? That's the chilling thing that we see in Alien, the first Alien movie, is that they're talking to Mother like the ChatGPT stand-in, basically, and very prophetic. And it's basically like, prime directive, bring back the alien, crew expendable, right? And so that's but Andy is programmed to be the opposite, right? Rain is not expendable. Rain is the most important thing. And I actually think that's maybe why Romulus is in such a tricky position storytelling wise, because if you think back to Aliens, Ripley has this really biting line to Paul Reiser's character, who's the worst, Burke, right? It's just, oh my gosh. It's the beside some this is sidebar. My dad was always really happy when the lawyer dies in Jurassic Park, because he's like, lawyer, he got what he deserved, right?
Yeah.
Lawyers are the worst, right? And this has that feeling of like his death is so satisfying because he's been trying to undermine everybody else the whole time, and he just is so like greedy and petty and all that sort of stuff, right? But my point is that Romulus doesn't have a human occupying that role. Instead, we have the weird resurrection of Ian Holm being like, oh, remember, this is the mission, the company, this is the mission. And there's no human representative kind of aiding and abetting the company's agenda, if that makes sense. Instead, like, Andy has to kind of adopt it temporarily in this weird, like, possessed ghoulish way. And then he goes back to being his nice human caring self, right? So I mean, I think that's what makes it interesting and different compared to the other movies, but I think it is also what's setting up its own trap in terms of why the story doesn't totally work as an Alien movie.
My only pushback on that is it's the robot who's the company man in the original movie too. I mean, initially it's interesting, the sort of, and this is again is part of why I think if you look at the two of them next to each other, it's like Romulus, great time, good time. But like you watch Alien, you're like, well, this is more successful in lots of different ways. One of them is you start with the crews all hanging out and they're chit-chatting, and there is like the immediate stratification of like, there's the two guys that work down below, Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto, Parker and Brent. And they're just sort of like, well, what if we're actually getting less of a share than you guys are? And like the captain's immediately shutting them down to be like, you signed your contract, I don't know, whatever. And they have like a gap between them. And it's sort of the like, well, like, there's some people who have a little bit more and some people have a little bit less. And then it's only when the situation really starts kicking off that the robot reveals himself to sort of just be like, all of you have nothing. Like, all of you are nothing. You're all meaningless. You are purely like cogs, because we haven't figured out how to get all these buttons pressed by machines but until now. And you're just here to do this task, which is go and find this thing and bring it back, because we think we can make a shed load of money off of it. And so that's what we want you to do. So so I think that you're right in that it isn't as successful, because it does, there is like the tension between the humans. I think, to again, it's not a nitpick, because I think these are fair critiques, but to critique a movie that I do like quite a little bit more, the other characters, the other four people who go up on the ship, the miners who are on the ship, the fodder to be murdered by the aliens as the movie unfolds. They're like, there's a lot of telling about just sort of like, and then my parents died and I'm sad about that. And it's like, isn't this person upset about like what happened when folks broke up? And I think that they never really got that to click as well as it could have. And I think that maybe if that had happened, even if there wasn't a company directive person there, then more like clarity or more naturalism to the tension but within that group might have made it feel a little bit stronger, when it was like, but none of that actually matters, because what matters is these forces outside of your control, and they have put you in. I mean, you've made a choice to break into this place, but you've ended up in a position that is so far outside of your ken that you cannot possibly understand what you've gotten yourself into until it's too late. Do you want to just briefly, like, and this is not like the big rant I already had was the big rant, but this is the like actual like academic discourse around these movies, and particularly the original, which I will admit, it's all very Freudian. It's rooted in Freudian and Lacanian critique, which are things I do not really understand, and this is not my standard sort of thing.
You're not into the mirror phase? Come on, PC.
Look, what I'll say is that, like, I guess a person whose name keeps coming up is Barbara Creed, who has done a lot of film criticism, particularly around horror films, and has this concept about the monstrous feminine. And it is I'm just reading straight from Wikipedia here, refers to the interpretation of horror films conceptualizing women predominantly as victims. She observes how women are positioned as victims in the horror film genre and challenges the overriding patriarchal and one-dimensional understanding of women through them, and that Alien is a different version of that. And there is evidence that a lot of the people we were talking about, who are all the people who are in there, but the individuals who probably have the best credit for it, like Dan O'Bannon invented sort of the story. The alien creature is always credited to him and his co-writer, whose name I am forgetting, Ronald Shusett. But Dan O'Bannon, Ridley Scott, and James Cameron all have talked about how they like to tell stories that don't just have helpless women characters. And it all has, like, when they talk about it, they all have this weird, very like bro, like macho, like very patriarchal way of just sort of like, well, like everyone's used to that. And so I want to do it different. Like the worst being James Cameron's, who's just like, well, like women make up half the audience. And in every couple, women make the choice 95% of the time of what movie to go see. So why don't you respect women? And it's like, oh, okay, James, like, let's talk to your 3 ex-wives and we'll see what they think about this. But the concept, some of the approaches that Dan O'Bannon had when thinking about it was, like he was approaching what the alien should be like as a metaphorical dramatization of a male fear of penetration, and that the oral invasion from the face hugger into particularly a male character in the original movie is payback for all the horror movies in which it's women who are treated as sexually vulnerable and being terrorized by male monsters. And he said, like in an interview, like years later, one thing that everyone is always disturbed about during the course of their life is sex. And so how am I going to attack the audience? The best way is to like tap into their fears sexually. And he didn't want to be doing that by going after women, but by going after men. And so the Barbara Creed take on it is like, in doing that, and especially as it becomes like, it's not necessarily clear that the alien that bursts out and takes over the Nostromo is male or female, but in Aliens, there's the big bad is the queen, who's the woman who's laying the eggs, and the eggs are inherently feminine as well. That all the alien things are rooted in the archaic mother, which is the monstrous feminine figure that goes back to the idea that, like, well, there's a mother, and you, in a Freudian sense, are scarred by the first time you realize that sex exists, is realizing your parents had to have sex to have you. And so, again, that's where I start to like lose a little bit of track in the Freudian concepts of things. But it's this idea that like inherently reproduction is this sort of Lovecraftian horror. And so we're like afraid of it on some primal level. And so there's all these things where the head of the alien kind of penis shaped, the little thing that goes into the throat, and the tail on the face hugger kind of phallus like, and then the mouth vaginal, the egg vagina, like all these things are like have these elements to it. There's birth inside of you. It explodes out of you. But her breakdown of the movie, of the original Alien, is like before you get to the eggs and before there's a face hugger, the ship is a womb, and everyone is birthed back to life when these things very like pleasantly open, and you're just a fully grown human. And like, isn't that like what you think? Like when the first time you ever think it's just like, I just was a kid. Like I'm who I am now. I just emerged into life. somehow, and then entering into the derelict ship on the planet is entering into like the horseshoe shape is like legs, the hole looks like a vagina, the gun is this big gun that the skeleton is on, that and then you're in this weird like biomechanical Giger, everything looks like ribs on the inside, this like it's constructed but it's also feels organic, so that like there's all these places to it, and the big corporate monster that's hanging over you is a computer called Mother. And so it's this like twisting around of like what's the feminine and what we're afraid of, and as well as sort of having it be that the what you may not know as the movie is unfolding, if you're watching it for the first time and you are somehow unaware of the actors in the movie and the sequels and everything, you don't realize it ends up the women as the last two people who are alive, or at least two of the last three, and are the ones who take it out. So yeah, a lot of stuff around this concept, sort of the feminism of it, the sort of anti-feminism, maybe, especially when you get into James Cameron, it's the mid 80s Reaganite like politics of potentially there's readings of Aliens that are like hyper conservative, but also have this thing of like strong women, but is she strong because she's a mom and she should embrace a traditional role? So lots of stuff around that. But in the rhetorical situation around this movie, this sort of feminism, monstrous feminine, digging into the sort of weird psychosexual components of what the aliens are like and how the people react to it and respond to it, and how they're trying to make things scary by taking the traditional slasher movie of we're going to go kill a bunch of co-eds and make it maybe we're going to kill a bunch of middle-aged trucker dudes, but in space, like is like part of the idea behind it, and theoretically what some of the things that like keep it resonating going forward.
Don't forget that the end of Aliens is the standoff between Ripley and the Queen, and specifically the placement of Newt,
yes,
as her adopted daughter, right? Like it to me, that when I watched that scene, it definitely felt like two mothers at a standoff, and then like they're like, well, if you let me leave with my spawn, I'll let you stay, like survive with yours. And then one of the eggs opens, and then it's all over, right? Like so they didn't, the truce didn't hold. And then Ripley burns it all, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like the like weird power of motherhood, but also like in both of the first two movies, Ripley is constantly being gaslit, right? Of like, nobody listens to her, presumably because she's a woman, right? Like, you know, she's the one who's like, no, according to the chain of command, I'm the one making this decision, and everyone just totally ignores her, opens the doors, and then chaos ensues. And the second one, she's the one who's like, you do not understand. You go to this planet, everyone's gonna die, right?
Yeah.
And then they don't listen to her. So, yeah, I don't know. So thank you for taking us to school on that one. I had like inklings of some of that, but I hadn't really dug into it. So
I do, at the risk of ruining our explicit language content warning, we do need to note that standoff you're talking about at the end, which is the fourth act, because you think they've gotten away from the alien queen, and then the alien queen's there and attacks, is, I mean, to truly use the word iconic correctly, but Ripley coming out in the mech loading suit, and the push into her face, and the best line in Aliens, coincidentally the worst line in Alien Romulus, get away from her, you bitch. I mean, so it's great because you've spent the whole movie building up to this standoff and this idea, even though the concept of a queen, like I was paying attention this time, like they don't start talking about the alien queen until like 2/3 through the movie, like they start speculating about it, but like because I think, you know, having read very lightly skimmed some of the scholarship, this idea that like even in the original it's all so tied into this like feminine threat of a character, or this like weird psychosexual construct of Giger's alien, that you know, you're kind of primed to think like, yeah, well, I guess they're fighting like this female form, and then Did you watch the special edition, Jen, or did you watch the original
I
version?
watched whatever was streaming on Disney Plus, which again,
Okay.
the fact that that's on Disney Plus
Because I
is
know
like...
HBO Max gives you the choice to do one or the other.
Oh,
The
okay.
special edition has the scene that you may not have seen early on when Paul Reiser has to tell Ripley, your daughter died. Because she was like, I've been gone for 57 years. I need to find my daughter. I was supposed to be back for her 11th birthday. Like, I promised her I would be back. And he's like, she died when she was like 52 and she's cremated in this cemetery. And she like breaks down crying, which is like maybe not necessary to get that. But like, I think Sigourney Weaver is great in that scene and really sets up this sort of the found family element and the like, they're fighting over who is our children are dead. And it's kind of your fault that the other one's fault that like, I don't have these children anymore. We're going to fight over this. And then, as in all good alien movies, an alien gets pushed out an airlock into space, and that's how you kill it.
I think we've lost Greg. It's that hour of the evening.
It's the first week of classes. I'm sorry, Greg.
Yeah, I know.
Monologuing at him.
Let's close out with super duper quick Oscars watch. Okay, so I'm assuming this is gonna be short because, like, does this actually have any chances? I don't think so. Maybe like visual effects. Maybe.
Yeah, the history of the Alien movies is that if it gets nominated, it's probably in visual effects. The only nominations after the first two are for Alien 3 and Prometheus in visual effects. I could see it. It was vaguely successful. We had pretty good reviews. I don't feel like folks are talking about being absolutely blown away, but maybe we get to the end of the year and people are just like, I don't know, like, what do we need for a fifth movie here? Like, it could be this, but I think that's it. Maybe sound. Like, I feel like these movies are also very sound based, but I would assume there's movies between Dune 2 and then other movies that may come out. There's actual Oscar happy movies that will take those categories.
It's hard in the context of the turn from August to September and film festival season to be optimistic about a movie's chances of this size. I think the win is that it was pretty well reviewed and did pretty decent box office. I don't know that this started its life as a streaming movie, but I think that might be true, right? Like this kind of in the way Prey.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like a Hulu release. Yeah.
It was on the Prey track. I think Prey being as embraced and successful, and people being like, "Why is this in the theater?" Hell, and plus Fede Alvarez, doing a good job with it, switched it over to let's get in the theater.
So I think that's the win. I think as I think was in my first comment of the evening, I think this helps raise the stock of Kaylee Spaney and I already forgot his first name, Johnson.
David Johnson.
David Johnson. I think both of them.
That stock is so high. It's almost first name height.
I think both of them get a nice bounce out of this. There are cool directors who are going to see this and be like, wow, those are really cool people I want to put in my projects. And I think that all helps this along and might be the end of it. But, it could be enough to reignite. I could see them trying more Aliens movies. There's maybe another TV show coming. I think I was just served an ad for something called Aliens Earth or something like that.
It's Alien Earth. A ship of xenomorphs is going to land on Earth. Timothy Oliphant's the robot of the crew. And there's an actress whose name I cannot recall, who's the woman who's not Ripley, who is in the main character of that crew. Coming in 2025 from Noah Hawley of Legion and Fargo fame. So reasonably excited for that. Although there is you both may not know, there was a long-standing hope that the Alien movies with Sigourney Weaver were eventually going to get to the xenomorphs get to Earth. That's what it was building towards. And that, like, when they were developing Alien 3, it was going to be like we'll film 3 and 4 back to back, and 4 was going to be the aliens get to Earth. Then they didn't do that. And then after Resurrection, it was maybe this is going to be the next one will be aliens get to Earth. So it'll be interesting if it does end up only happening on a TV show. But I don't know. I guess we'll find out. It also seems very possible that if this show is successful, they back up a truck to Sigourney Weaver and have her be like old Ripley, and be like she finally gets to see xenomorphs on Earth and try to do something about it. And I'll just say to close Oscar Watch, one of the greatest Oscar nominations of all time is Sigourney Weaver in lead actress for Aliens. The first time there was a sci-fi lead acting performance, or at least lead actress performance. And absolutely incredible. The kind of thing that never happens nowadays. Every time we talk about could Javier Bardem get supporting actor for Dune Part 2, or Timothée Chalamet get lead actor for Dune Part 2, or should Charlize Theron have gotten lead actress for Fury Road? It's always like, they never do that. It's like, well, they did do it once. And it was Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. And she lost to Marlee Matlin in Children of a Lesser God, which a movie I've not seen, but Marlee Matlin is very, very good. So I would not be surprised that she deserves it. But incredible nomination. Great job, Academy back then.
I was pleasantly surprised when I saw this, and because I didn't remember. So, Greg, thank you for valiantly sticking out this recording with us. We know we got to get you to bed so that you can be fresh for your students on the first day of school tomorrow. Where can folks find you?
You can find me online, mostly on Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at IonCanon, UIEONCANON. Hey, I did shout out that I've been watching a bunch of crazy horror movies this summer. It's been a really good summer for horror. I'm putting in a plug for Strange Darling that is out right now and is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen, but is kind of incredible. So I'm putting in that plug. The one I was referring to where I saw things that I can't unsee that will never live with me was In a Violent Nature, I believe it was called, which came out back in June. So crazy summer full of horror. All those reviews are on my Letterboxd if you want to know what weird little joke I came up with while I was bored while some body was being hacked apart. PT, where can people find you?
You can find me on Letterboxd at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. And you can also find the show there at LTR Pod. Or you can find us on Instagram or Threads at The Long Take Review. And you can also subscribe to the show wherever you are listening to the podcast right now, or wherever you prefer to listen. If for some reason you're listening in a weird venue that you don't particularly like, go to your normal podcast place and subscribe there. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, on Instagram and Threads. You can in particular go to Instagram to see the face that I made at bracing myself to see this movie. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jinn. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully there's no fourth act to this recording.
I have another monologue to give.
Greg is still screaming something. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes, as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.